What is up everyone, it's Saber here and welcome to another Naruto What If you end up liking the video, please consider subscribing. It's free and you can take it back at any time and it really helps me out, and this is my main channel, so if you're interested in what if Naruto was raised by the Joker, or what if Naruto had a shape-shifting bloodline and was insane, go check out my main channel. And if you're interested in what if Naruto was taken at birth by Sephiroth, or what if Naruto had crystal release, go check out my third channel. And with all of the YouTube formalities out of the way, let's get into it. Sarutobi compound, this had better be important. Jiraiya the Hokage snapped, his sleep fitful and restless as it may have been, had been interrupted for the fourth night in a row, and he was more than willing to spread the misery at this point. It is Jiraiya, replied, his voice completely serious. For once one of my contacts has come across information that a major disruption of some sort will occur during the third phase, and several people within Konoha are going to be targeted for kidnapping, including Naruto. The Hokage was instantly on alert, and one of his ANBU appeared kneeling nearby. In response to his signal, bring Shikaku and Dragon here immediately. Priority black. Sarutobi said. He turned back to Jiraiya as the ANBU disappeared. While we wait for them to get here, why don't you bring me up to speed on Naruto-kun's training? Jiraiya blinked at the odd shift in topic, but shrugged. They had a few minutes to kill, and he certainly didn't mind talking about his latest student. Well, he's picked up the Rasengan at a rapid pace. He's blown through the first two stages without a problem and is currently working on the third and final stage. Once he gets past that, I intend to have him start experimenting with Minato's theories on adding elemental manipulation to it. How is his progress in the sealing arts? Boy is a damn genius, Jiraiya said, smiling widely. I haven't found a seal yet that he couldn't break down and analyze within an hour tops. Some of those would have taken me a day or more. When I was learning, I couldn't break down some of those that fast. Now the Hokage nodded thoughtfully. That would make sense given his desire to free himself and the other Bijou from their seals. How is he at creating seals? Still damn good, though not quite at the same level. He does better at combining existing seals in unusual ways, but I haven't seen him craft a truly new seal on the fly yet. He'll get there though. What types of seals have you focused on? Nothing specific, Jiraiya said. I've started with all the B rank seals I know, and we're working our way up to the A ranks. Once he gets through those, I'm going to give him a scenario he has to create a new seal for before we move on to S ranks. Have you decided what that task will be? Not yet. I'm thinking it will be something to complement his massive chakra reserves, or perhaps something that utilizes his medical knowledge. Consider having him create a seal that prevents the placement or functioning of other seals in an area or on an object, the Hokage said. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow. That'd be a hell of a seal, he replied musingly. S rank easily. I was thinking of something a little easier. The Hyuga Eris is on his team, the Hokage answered. I think you'll find he would be quite motivated to do so. That the caged bird seal had absolutely nothing to do with his motivation. Wasn't something Jiraiya needed to know right now. Both eyebrows rose this time. I see something going on I need to know about. Yes, not at the moment, the Hokage replied, closing his eyes in contemplation. Considerate insurance. Kushu would understand the message. Sarutobi was sure such a seal would likely take a long time to perfect, so it was a small gesture on his part that could strengthen their uneasy alliance. Fair enough, sensei. Further discussion was put on hold as Shikaku and the ANBU commander arrived. Once they were all gathered in Sarutobi's office, Jiraiya gave his report regarding the possible disruption during the third phase. My contact didn't have anything specific that would reveal who was behind it or what the purpose could be other than allowing the targets to be kidnapped anyway. Shikaku shook his head. Any distraction large enough to prevent us from pursuing the kidnappers would be far too risky for that sole purpose. I suspect there are multiple groups involved in this, or at least some groups that are willing to take advantage of the situation for their own gain. I agree, the Hokage said, nodding respectfully at Shikaku, which is going to make any potential response on our part incredibly difficult. We have at least 3 different types of targets: children with active bloodlines, a Tokubetsu Jounin who was subjected to experimentation as a child, and a Jinchuriki. We have to at least acknowledge the possibility that there are 3 or more distinct groups involved in this. What about the Eastern Dragons? Hazashi asked. Everyone in the room was aware of his identity, and he relished the chance to talk without that damn mask distorting his voice. What are the chances that they are directly involved, and how much can we trust their information? Normally, I would say that they would stay out of something like this, Jiraiya said, but it's been a long time since they've suffered any sort of serious setback. The current leadership used to have a healthy fear of what ninja are capable of, but that can always change. As for the information that something will happen, I consider a fact at this point. There's too much other evidence to support it that it Won't target the Fire Lord or his court. Hard to say. Shikaku spoke next. A successful attack on the Fire Lord within Konoha could very well destroy our reputation and quickly lead to the ruin of the village. An almost successful attack on the other hand would unleash the Fire Lord's wrath on the perpetrator. I would expect someone to go through the motions but make it obvious it's a feint if the Fire Lord is never seriously threatened. I don't think he would bother with more than a token response in return. A good feint would still be enough to tie up some of our best ANBU though, so I would expect that same with any other dignitaries. Jiraiya grimaced. Exactly how many dignitaries are we talking about? I haven't exactly been focused on the details for the third phase lately. The Fire Lord, his wife, and his two youngest children. The Hokage replied. The Wind Lord, his wife, and his second daughter both of course will be attended by their respective retinues. No country has officially claimed Odo as their ninja village, so we don't expect any nobles to attend for them. The Hokage took a deep breath then continued. Then there's the representatives from the lands of water, lightning, rivers and hot water, not to mention all the prominent merchants and guild masters who will be attending. In all there's over 300 people who could be considered high-value targets for someone, and we can't afford to let anything happen to any of them. Troublesome. Some would definitely be worse than others, but in essence yes. The room settled into an uncomfortable silence as each contemplated the possible outcomes. Now then, the Hokage said, we already have quite a few plans in place for attacks, but they could always use review. We have just over a week to update our plans in light of this new information, so I suggest we get started. Time skip. Yamanaka residents Ino, Temari and Kankuro were currently sitting in the kitchen chatting about various topics and generally just getting to know each other. Baki and Kakashi were talking with Inoichi in the backyard, and Gaara and Naruto were currently sitting in the living room where they were ostensibly talking quietly about their respective experiences as Jinchuriki. Given their respective personalities, the fact that Naruto seemed to be doing all of the talking would not strike anyone as particularly odd. An observer would also be hard-pressed to detect the small thread of Yuki that currently connected Naruto and Gaara. Even if they did, they would not have been able to understand its purpose. Time skip. Inside Gaara's seal. Within the seal, the desert stretched as far as the eye could see in every direction. The sun hung high in the sky as its rays beat down upon the desert. There were almost no landmarks or deviations to break up the monotony, just flat featureless sand everywhere except for one small area. The exception was a small patch of grass in the middle of the area. Placed upon the grass was a small round stone table with 3 chairs around it. All 3 chairs were currently occupied. Kushu sat in one seat, his appearance currently that of his container. 2 Gaara sat across from him, one with red hair and one with light brown hair. Kushu turned to the brown-haired Gaara first. How much do you think he can handle at the moment? All of it, I'd say, Ryudo replied, his voice serious. Gaara observed the exchange curiously, his eyes shifting from one to the other. Really, judging from what you left me during the ceiling, he'll take it even better. Then Ino did no preconceptions to worry about. All right then, it's your call. Turning to the red-haired Gaara, he cleared his throat. I may have misrepresented my situation somewhat during our earlier conversations, he began. Your Kushu, Gaara said calmly. You see, when you first appeared in the seal, you were in the form of a giant 9-tailed fox. Gaara stated, his tone flat, almost bored. You hesitated before answering when I asked if you were a Jinchuriki. Every time you've appeared here, you've been alone, whereas Ryudo is always with me. Your mannerisms do not change significantly between the outside world and here, however, so you aren't two different people. Your prior conversation and the ease with which you addressed Ryudo confirmed my suspicions. Kushu gaped at Gaara even as Ryudo started laughing. Recovering quickly, he snapped his jaw shut and nodded uncertainly. Oh well, yes, I am, he finally replied. What happened to your container? Gaara asked, causing Ryudo's laughter to trail off. He died during the sealing, Kushu said. Gaara nodded slowly, considering that answer. His eyes shifted from Ryudo back to Kushu for a few moments before he shrugged. Very well, what did you wish to talk about? That's it, Kushu asked, surprised. I'm still alive and in control, and as far as I can tell, other than for this particular piece of information, you have been honest with me. Technically, even then, you never outright lied. Since the body you are sealed within is a Jinchuriki, it's alright, brother, Ryudo interjected, nodding firmly. Gaara understands. Kushu nodded slowly, shaking off his surprise. Well, that will certainly makes things a lot easier. That was the most important issue I wanted to talk about, but there are some other things you need to be aware of. First off, the Hokage knows who I am now. Gaara's eyes widened slightly and Ryudo stiffened. Does he know about me? Ryudo asked tightly. Not for certain, but he probably suspects. For the time being, we should claim that you are recovering and unconscious. That work for you? Gaara just shrugged. It does not matter to me. I do not answer to the Hokage. Kushu grinned. Don't be so quick to decide on that. I mentioned the possibility that all 9 of us could reside in Konoha, and he seemed receptive. Gaara shook his head firmly. I have business in Suna. Kushu's eyes turned to Ryudo, noting his darkened face and angry scowl before he looked back to Gaara. Will that business leave the village intact? Gaara shrugged again. It depends on how hard the Kazekage fights. I see Ryudo. How good is his control over your power? It's complete shit, Ryudo replied succinctly. Gaara frowned. My connection to my sand feels stronger than it ever has before, and I can control it far more easily. Alright, let me amend that then. Almost complete shit, Kushu barked a laugh. You don't honestly think sand is the limit of his power, do you? Gaara blinked slowly. I have never heard of any other powers of his, he said, turning to look expectantly at Ryudo. The Bijou just shook his head, smirking. My brethren didn't name me the flowing earth, because I threw dust at them. We'll work on it, he said, turning back to Kushu. It might take us a while, but he will be worthy of my name, alright. In the meantime, do you honestly think you can take Anakage? Gaara frowned. I will kill him, he said firmly, and I'm not trying to stop you, I'm trying to make sure you actually succeed. Let's assume you could kill the Kazekage. What will you do about the other ninja? What are you going to do after you succeed? It doesn't matter as long as he dies. What about Temari and Kankuro? Kushu pressed, frowning. Gaara's eyes widened, and he frowned. I don't know. Ryudo shook his head. You have to get your priorities in order, my friend. Killing the bastard that did this to us is good and all. I'm all for it myself, no question, but in the end he's irrelevant. Family comes first, always. Kushu agreed, shooting a grin at Ryudo. Besides, don't you think they would want to participate as well? From what Ino has told me, Temari and Kankuro have their own bones to pick with him. Gaara nodded thoughtfully. They aren't as strong as I am, though. I don't want them to get hurt. A noble sentiment, my friend, Ryudo said, but you are looking at it the wrong way. I myself am not as powerful as Kushu here, but that does not mean I am helpless. Kushu smirked. If they are weak now, then simply make them stronger, and don't let Ryudo sell himself short either. Each of the Bijou are capable of certain feats none of the others can perform. You will find that our greatest works are a result of working together, such as Gaara asked curiously. It took 4 of us to create a permanent two-way portal from the demon realm to the human realm, for instance. Kushu finally answered. Realms? What do you mean? Kushu sighed. I'll let Ryudo explain later. The point is, do you have any abilities or skills that complement your siblings' own? Gaara shook his head slowly. I never tried to work with them like that, he admitted, his head dropping slightly. Give it some thought. Better yet, why don't you get your entire team together and talk it over? Even if you don't come up with anything immediately, you will eventually. In the meantime, what jutsu do you have aside from your fledgling control over Ryudo's powers? Gaara's frown deepened. None. Yeah, I was afraid of that. How's your chakra control? I don't know. Taijutsu. I never fight at close range. Do you have anything aside from the sand? Gaara just shook his head mutely. Well, on the upside, you're already incredibly dangerous with just that, so you've got a good base to work from. I doubt we'll get much of anything done before the exams, but I suspect Ryudo will be able to teach you a few tricks. I've got a shortcut that might help you in the meantime, Kushu said, extending his hand. A small stream of yuki poured across the table where Ryudo reached out his hand and pulled it, and he cocked his head to the side and pondered the information Kushu had given him before. His face split into a wide grin. Oh, that's just mean. Kushu had a matching grin on his face. Isn't it just? Ryudo turned his grin towards Gaara. Earth clones, he said, before bursting into wild laughter. Time skip. Konoha. Hey Sakura, Ino called out, jogging forward to catch up with her friend. The pink-haired girl was currently walking down the road towards the market district, but paused to allow Ino to join her. Hey Ino, Sakura replied, smiling. You guys done with training already? Now we're just breaking for lunch. Naruto's been off training with Jiraiya this morning, so it was just me and Hinata. I still can't believe Naruto is training under one of the Sannin. That is so cool, Sakura said. Ino shrugged. It's mostly been seals and a couple of jutsu. It might have been more impressive if he'd actually managed to sign the scroll for the Toad summons. She'd grown up hearing stories about the power behind a summoning contract, and having one that close yet not being able to use it was a major disappointment. On the other hand, Naruto had promised to teach her the Rasengan once he had mastered it. She was definitely looking forward to that. Sakura nodded uncertainly. I see, she said, though her voice made it clear that she really didn't. So what has your team been up to? Ino asked, changing the subject. Kurenai-sensei has us focusing on physical conditioning and taijutsu during our team sessions, though all of us have other things to work on as well. I'm training to maintain a genjutsu while using another jutsu. Ino whistled lowly. That would be damn useful, she mused. How's that going? Sakura frowned. Not well, she admitted. Kurenai-sensei insists it's just a matter of getting used to it, but I haven't even managed to pull it off once, even with the simple genjutsu. What happens as soon as I start building up the next jutsu? The genjutsu just falls apart. Yeah, but why? Maintaining a genjutsu just requires a small amount of mental focus and a bit of chakra, right? For the simple ones, yeah, the more complex ones take more attention and chakra. Well, is it falling apart because you lose focus or because of the chakra focus? Sakura said quietly. You're still pouring everything into each technique, Ino said, nodding sagely. How is Kurenai helping you with that? She is Shino and Sasuke attacking me while I cast Genjutsu. She says if I can pull off Genjutsu while dodging attacks then the focus problem should take care of itself. Ino nodded thoughtfully. That's one way to do it I suppose, she said, trailing off. You have another idea? Sakura asked hopefully. Ino almost winced at the desperate edge to Sakura's voice. Her friend had not taken her loss in the preliminaries well. She hadn't fallen back into her old habits yet, but her confidence and enthusiasm had definitely taken a blow in some ways. Ino considered that a personal affront. Sakura was one of her greatest friends, right up there with Shikamaru and Chuji, but she was also the first person Ino had ever really helped, using her family's skills, turning the shy quiet bookworm into the proud vivacious girl who could handle any situation and was willing to assert her own opinion even if others disagreed, had been Ino's greatest accomplishment. To date she didn't consider her work complete, though not. Yet Sakura was still too quick to seek validation from those around her rather than trusting her own conclusions, and her team's loss in the prelims was not helping on that front. Sakura had blossomed when she was included with the other clan kids, but at the same time she didn't have a niche, an area where she excelled above all others. Ino had been ecstatic when Sakura had gotten Kurenai as a teacher, and had taken to Genjutsu like a fish to water. Finally her friend would have her own area of expertise, and finally she would feel like she contributed something meaningful to the group. No one had been able to convince the pink-haired girl that she didn't need to prove anything to anyone in the group, that she was already a valued and vital part of their team. Still, if Sakura needed this to prove to herself that she could keep up with the others, then Ino would help. Fortunately, years spent watching Naruto experiment with some highly unorthodox methods of using jutsu had given her quite a few ideas to help Sakura out. Well, she said slowly, Kurenai basically wants you to do two things at once, right? Or rather, she wants you to focus on dodging and fighting while casting a genjutsu. Sakura nodded quickly, her eyes fixed on Ino. But you actually focus on casting the genjutsu while dodging and fighting, don't you? Sakura blinked. I hadn't thought about it like that, but yeah, I do. Well, it's to be expected. You know, the point of the exercise is to cast the genjutsu, and you will do everything in your power to make it work. Unfortunately, it sounds like you need to do just the opposite from what you've said. You have to be able to use a genjutsu without really thinking about it. Sakura blushed and lowered her head, looking vaguely ashamed. Hey, none of that, Ino snapped, pulling Sakura to the side of the road. Kurenai is known as the genjutsu mistress because that's something very few ninja can do. She clearly believes you can pull this off, and so do I. Sakura's eyes widened, and she nodded reflexively. However, I'd like to think I know you a little better than she does. I'm sure her approach will work eventually, but I think I have an idea that will challenge you in the right way and hopefully move things along faster. What is it? Sakura asked hesitantly. She'd seen what Ino and Naruto considered challenging before, and she was more than a little leery of any task along those lines. Do you have any genjutsu you can use without hand signs? A handful, yeah, Sakura admitted. Just the really basic and obvious ones though, like black vision and deafening burst. Perfect, Ino said, smiling. Why don't you try using those? I have at the same time. Isn't that what I've been trying to do? No, I mean try launching them simultaneously. Sakura's jaw dropped. That's a rank skill. People usually don't try that until they're jounin. She yelped. Only because ninja usually manage to do that only after they've already become jounin, Ino said, waving Sakura's objections away. When you get right down to it, it's just a matter of chakra control. And what rating did your chakra control get during the last test? Sakura admitted quietly. Exactly. Sakura's mouth opened and closed several times before she finally asked, you really think I could do that? Sakura, I know you can do it, it's just a question of when, and that will help with my genjutsu problem. As I understand what you're trying to do, yes, even if it doesn't, you'll still have an incredibly useful and versatile skill added to your arsenal, Ino added, smiling. Can you do that? Sakura asked, her curiosity plain. Not even close. My chakra control just barely merits an A rank. Can Naruto do that? Well, he can, but he also cheats. Sakura asked, confused. What do you mean? You'll find out eventually. It's not all that important, but you can think of it as something unique to him that lets him use chakra in strange ways. And speaking of Naruto, I'm supposed to be meeting him for lunch later, Ino, Sakura said, smiling gratefully, and thanks for helping me anytime. Sakura, that's what friends are for. Time skip at Chiraku's restaurant. Ino observed the crowd as she walked into the restaurant and headed for Naruto's personal booth. Tochi had insisted on created a special booth reserved solely for Naruto-sama's use. As a gesture of his appreciation, it was tucked away in a quiet corner of the restaurant, shielded from sight. Naruto had added privacy seals to the booth that served to dampen the sounds emanating from the rest of the restaurant, and if fully activated, would allow anyone sitting there complete privacy for as long as they wished. It that the booth was located conveniently close to the kitchens was not a coincidence. Aside from Naruto's booth, the restaurant was almost completely packed with both ninja and civilians. Ino noted several Akimichi among the crowd and smiled. Earning an Akimichi's patronage was as close to guaranteed success in Konoha as it got. Not only did the family consume a great deal of food on their own, but they were considered incredibly picky when it came to the taste and quality of their meals. It was very rare that they would venture outside of their own restaurants, but any other restaurant they decided to patronize was either highly successful or rapidly became so. Ino swiped her hand along the security seal on Naruto's booth, alerting anyone inside that she would be entering the blurry barrier, lowered a moment later to reveal Naruto sitting idly in the booth alone. He was currently focused on reading a small scroll, but looked up and smiled when Ino settled into her seat. "Hey Ino ne-chan," he said, putting the scroll away. "How's Sakura doing?" Ino snorted. She'd long ago gotten used to how Naruto knew what she'd been up to. Nearly all of the time he could sense chakra signatures better than most full-blown sensors, and made it a point to keep an eye on Ino at all times. Some might find it rather creepy, but she found it reassuring. She'd have done the same for him if she had the option. "She's alright," Ino replied. "Kurenai-sensei has them on physical conditioning, and she's trying to figure out how to use a jutsu while maintaining a genjutsu. I suggested she practice using 2 genjutsu at the same time." Naruto nodded thoughtfully. "She's got the control for it, though her reserves might be a problem. Would it help if I gave her some advice?" Ino shook her head. "Not just yet. She needs to make some progress on her own. Once she does, then you can step in if she gets stuck." "Alright," Naruto shrugged. "I went ahead and ordered for you when you started this way beef and vegetable ramen with a side of dumplings." "Thanks. How was the training session with Jiraiya?" Naruto motioned to the scroll. "Got my first A rank seal. This one is designed to completely rust through a metal structure over the course of a few hours less. If you don't care about anyone noticing other than a couple of tricks to define the boundaries of the effect, it's pretty simple. Only you would consider an A-rank seal simple," Ino said, smirking. He shrugged as he replied, "It is what it is. It's well designed, though. As long as the structure was crafted of mostly the same material, you could swap out the target material and the deterioration effect in a matter of minutes." He sighed. "I keep hoping for something applicable to the Jinchuriki seals." But nothing yet. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their food brought to them by "I am personally." "Here you go, Naruto-kun." "Ino-chan," she said, smiling widely. "Enjoy." They continued to chat about their respective training as they ate, simply enjoying the food and relaxing. Roughly 20 minutes and several more bowls of ramen for Naruto. Later they were interrupted by someone other than I am. The barrier lowered to reveal a young man of medium height, dressed in simple, well-fitting clothes of decent quality. His face showed the wear and tear typical of someone who spent a lot of time outdoors, and his hands were lightly scarred, though his light tan indicated he had been spending less time exposed to the sun recently. His brown hair was cropped close to his head, and his brown eyes were gentle and kind. His overall posture indicated both physical strength and pride. Ino got the impression of a manual laborer who had recently come into wealth, likely as a result of his own efforts. "It's good to see you again, Naruto-kun." "Ino-chan, mind if I join you?" the young man asked, his voice a pleasant baritone. Naruto's eyes widened before a large grin split his face, confusing Ino. "Of course, my friend, feel free," he said. Ino eyed the newcomer, trying to place him as he settled into a seat across from her, and the barrier rose once again. She thought she knew everyone. Naruto did, but she couldn't recall this person. "You have got to tell me how you're doing that," Naruto said, confusing Ino even further. "I was inspired by your example," the young man replied, smiling softly. "To hide your strength behind a facade of weakness and then turn that weakness into a new source of strength. I started with my eyes, but it occurred to me that chakra itself could be considered a crutch. This particular use is an unexpected benefit of my efforts." Ino frowned. Those words reminded her of something in the back of her mind, something important. Naruto nodded thoughtfully. "Clever. But how are you?" He trailed off, making a vague gesture in the air. The young man rolled up his sleeve, revealing a small woven bracelet. Ino could make out both cloth and paper woven together that gave the bracelet a startling variety of colors. Naruto leaned forward, studying the bracelet intensely. He finally leaned back, clearly impressed. "Incredible. How quickly can you recover?" "That is the drawback. It takes at least 30 minutes before I'm at full capacity once again. On the other hand, even if the bracelet were broken or removed, I would not be immediately exposed. For my purposes it works very well. Of course, if you wanted to examine my work and make improvements, I would be most grateful. I understand you are studying under Jiraiya-sama now, and I am certain you would be more capable than I. Don't sell yourself short, my friend. That bracelet is a work of art." "Okay, what's going on?" Ino interrupted, annoyed. "What are you guys talking about? And who are you?" Our friend here has once more waltzed into Konoha without so much as batting an eyelid, only this time he's in the heart of the village, with no one the wiser, all thanks to that little bracelet. Ino's eyes slowly widened, and Her mouth dropped open as she stared at the young man sitting across from her. Itachi, she asked, her voice strangled. Itachi nodded, smiling pleasantly. I trust you have been well, Ino-chan. But you, how? What? She finally asked. Naruto snickered quietly. I told you he was good, but he looks nothing like Itachi. His hair, his eyes, his face, hell, even his voice is completely different. When Itachi spoke next, it was with the cool, even speech she had been accustomed to. It is all a matter of practice, he said calmly. Hair can be dyed, contact lenses can be placed in the eyes, and speech patterns and tones can be altered. I noticed you evaluating me, he said, his voice returning to its previous warm baritone. I imagine you concluded I was some sort of laborer who had moved up in the world. Ino blinked before blushing slightly in embarrassment. Well, yeah, there is no need for embarrassment, he said. That is what you were trained to do, and what you should have concluded from the available information, but you don't have any calluses from holding weapons, she pointed out, and you aren't using any jutsu to disguise yourself. Not at the moment, no, Itachi replied. I have concluded that ninja are overly reliant on chakra. Whenever a new technique is invented, someone else will create a technique to counter it. Always their efforts rely on chakra. When purely physical methods are every bit as effective, they simply require a great deal of preparation to pull off correctly. For instance, this a real tan, he said, motioning to his face, and these are real scars, he added, raising his hands. How long did it take you to do all of this? Ino asked, fascinated. Kakashi had talked to her about specializing in infiltration, but Itachi's presence and words were opening up entirely new avenues of thought. Roughly a week, he said, smiling again. Just because I am not using any chakra now does not mean I couldn't use it then. Medical jutsu are surprisingly versatile, as I'm sure Naruto-kun can attest. Of course, all of this would be a moot point if I was unable to hide my chakra, which is part of the reason ninja rarely think about such things. Naruto grinned. I'll definitely want to take a thorough look at that bracelet later. I might be able to adapt that for my own use, and I dare say Ino wouldn't mind having the option either. She just nodded mutely, her mind churning as she thought about all the ways those techniques could be used. So what brings you to Konoha this time, Itachi? Another scroll? Perhaps not this time, Naruto-kun. I have information that is a little more urgent than that, as well as a request. I'll get to the request later, but as for the information, I was approached by a group of contractors who offer work to missing men. They are not aware of my real identity, merely that I have established a good reputation as a freelancer. They offered me a job that would take place within Konoha during the third phase of the exams. Oh, Naruto said, leaning forward. And what would this job be? They want me to assassinate Gaara of the Sand. Ino's eyes widened in shock, but Naruto just nodded thoughtfully. Any idea who hired them? Nothing. I am certain enough to mention. Why would they want to kill Gaara? Ino asked quietly. Naruto shrugged. Killing Gaara would release Ryudo in the middle of Konoha. Given what most ninja think of the tailed beasts, they probably believe Konoha would sustain massive amounts of damage, possibly destroying it entirely, or at least weakening it enough for a finishing blow. Were Ryudo still suffering in Gaara's old seal? They would have been right. There's also the possibility that they just want to weaken Suna by killing its most prominent genin. Itachi shook his head. They specified that it must happen while he is within Konoha, preferably while he is in or near the stadium where the third phase is held. There you are then, Naruto said. We have to tell the Hokage, Ino said, shifting in her seat, as if she wanted to rush to the Hokage's tower. Right then, we will probably today, Naruto said calmly, but it is important not to reveal such vital information without getting something in return. I imagine that is where your request comes in. Itachi nodded. Yes, I require the assistance of a skilled medic. Mean very skilled? Ah, so you need me or Shizen? Yes, possibly both. I attempted to locate Tsunade-sama, but I have been unable to do so and dare not delay much longer lest the damage progress too far. Probably just as well you didn't. If she knew who you were, she'd likely try to kill you. I see. Anyway, what's the problem? You seem perfectly fine. It may seem that way, but I'm already noticing symptoms. If my condition continues to progress, it will end up killing me. That would be a problem, Naruto said, slowly staring at Itachi. Do you mind? He said, holding up his hand and allowing a bit of Yuki to curl off of it. Please. Naruto extended his hand and sent Yuki across the table where it poured into Itachi's body. Silence reigned for nearly a minute before Naruto sat back, a thoughtful expression on his face. I'm going to need help for this one, he admitted. I can see the damage, but I can't tell what's causing it. Short term, I could fix everything, but that wouldn't solve the real problem. I'll see what I can work out. Thank you, Itachi said calmly. Time skip. Otafuku. 3 men sat around a small table in a large, dimly lit room. They appeared to be the only occupants, but each knew that nearly a dozen servants and nearly 30 guards were scattered all around them. They were in the heart of their territory, in a room few knew about and even fewer would ever see, but they had not lived as long as they had, nor accumulated their considerable power by being careless. Once upon a time, each of these men had joined the Eastern Dragons as lowly couriers or thugs struggling to survive on their meager pay, and Attempting to impress their superiors with their loyalty and diligence, many of their comrades had striven to do the same, but only these three had both the determination and cunning necessary to navigate the treacherous waters of the criminal underworld and rise to the very top among outsiders. It is commonly believed that the Eastern Dragons have a single leader, a single individual who holds the reins of power in an iron grip, and answers to no one but himself. In the past, this was indeed the case. But that changed 40 years ago when these men joined forces and agreed to share control. Their alliance was rocky and tense at first, but the astonishing results they obtained when pooling their knowledge and resources convinced them to continue on their present path. 4 decades had forged bonds between them that would put all but the closest knit of families to shame. These men, moved with a single purpose, their minds unified in the pursuit of their common goals, power and wealth. All of our targets have been assigned, the first said, sipping sake slowly from a dish in his hand. Have our clients submitted their advance payments? The second asked. The last was delivered yesterday, 2 days ahead of schedule. The first replied, excellent. The third said, and our personal requests? The second smiled. Those have been accepted as well. Each clan compound has a group that will attempt to infiltrate it during the disruption. We do not expect success on every front, but any secrets obtained should be very lucrative, either for our own use or to sell to other hidden villages. The assassination contracts for certain of our rivals attending the exams have also been accepted. The first frowned slightly. We have acted decisively to take advantage of the situation, but where do we stand if Orochimaru's plan falls through? The room was silent for a few moments as each considered that outcome. Our reputation would take a small hit. The third conceded, but we would be largely unaffected. Our stake in the situation is mainly financial, and with the exception of a few advance payments, we stand to lose nothing should the snake's plan fail. In the worst case, it would take us roughly a year to recover our losses, and if we succeed, the second said slowly, then not only will we make considerable profits, but our reputation in other nations will rise as well, not to mention the obstacles that will be removed from our path. The three men shared grins as they toasted one another. The dragons rise, they said, as one time skip Hokage's tower. The promotion assessment hearing for Tokubetsu Jounin Anko Mitarashi is hereby called to order. Attending are Hiruzen Sarutobi Hokage Shikaku Nara Jounin Commander Hiroshi Akimichi Chunin Division 3 Commander and Anko Mitarashi Promotion Candidate. All other interested parties have previously submitted their assessments for the review of this panel. Hiroshi said. Anko stood stiffly in the middle of the room, for once wearing clothing similar to the normal ninja uniform. She still wore her trench coat, but she wore a short-sleeved black shirt over her mesh shirt and had swapped her mini skirt for a pair of black pants. She had her hands clasped behind her back and her head held high. The panel was seated at a long table in front of her, documents and scrolls spread out across the table. Everything from her mission records to personal recommendations had been gathered for this meeting, and some of the more prominent documents had been brought along so that they could be referenced during the discussion. The Hokage cleared his throat and began. Mitarashi-san, he said formally, I would first like to commend you on your nearly flawless mission record. You have completed a total of 24 A-rank missions, 67 B-rank missions, and over 300 C and D-rank missions. In addition, you have participated in 2 S-rank operations and received glowing reports from the commanding officers. Of those missions to date, you have only failed 7 missions, and 5 of those were aborted due to grossly inaccurate intelligence. I note that the other 2 missions were failed due to a tactical retreat in order to bring an injured comrade to medical aid. That too deserves to be commended. I have made an official note in your record that to this point you have not failed a single mission where this panel feels you could have reasonably succeeded, or should have continued. In light of this, we are awarding a bonus equal to mission pay for a single A-rank mission. Anko stood a little straighter at the praise and smiled. Thank you, Okage-sama. Thank you, Mitarashi-san. It is because of ninjas such as yourself that Konoha continues its legacy of strength and success. The Hokage paused for a moment, setting aside one scroll and picking up another. He cleared his throat again and continued, however, while your personal skill is not in doubt, that is only a part of what makes a successful Jounin. The difference between a Tokubetsu Jounin and a full Jounin lies not in personal skill but in leadership and discernment. Anko swallowed and shifted uneasily, her smile fading as she grew tense. She had advanced to the rank of Tokubetsu Jounin years ago on the merit of her combat skills and intelligence, but making the jump from Tokubetsu to full Jounin had proven incredibly difficult in the wake of her teacher's defection from the village and the suspicion that had fallen on her. Her reputation had taken a considerable hit, without the Yamanaka clan confirming her loyalty, and Jiraiya-sama sealing off the cursed seal. She might not have even gotten that far. She had spent the last 10 years rebuilding her reputation and driving her skills farther and farther, and at long last she had the chance to see all that work pay off. She had led numerous successful missions, and she felt proven that she could handle the strategic and tactical demands of leadership as well as keep her subordinates both effective and safe. As noted before, your mission record is exemplary, and you have personally led 9 A-rank missions and 42 B-rank missions. I also note that rarely were your team members the same for any 2 missions, and as such you have extensive experience working with other Tokubetsu Jounin and Chunin in many different circumstances, and can clearly make use of the skills and experience you have available. Shikaku cleared his throat at this point, and the Hokage allowed him to take over. Upon reviewing your mission records, we found an unusually high amount of complaints regarding your leadership style and overall effectiveness. He said, not bothering to refer to any documents directly. Anko winced. She could think of quite a few examples where she might have pushed things a little too far when one of her subordinates annoyed her or said something really stupid. On the other hand, it wasn't her fault. Most of the Chunin she worked with had sticks shoved so far up their asses they were eating bark, or couldn't think their way out of a wet paper bag. In particular, you have managed to accumulate an impressive 46 separate complaints regarding your, and I quote, violent tendencies. If I may ask, Nara-san, what instances were those complaints regarding? Anko said through clenched teeth. If some little Chunin chicken shit cost her a promotion, she'd give him something to complain about. Hiroshi shuffled through the scrolls in front of him, pulling out 3. Let's see, this one says, when I offered an alternative course of action for neutralizing the bandit camp, Mitarashi struck several pressure points to cause pain before rejecting my plan out of hand. He lifted the second scroll. This one claims that you nearly dislocated his left arm because he pointed out a flaw in your battle plan, and this one claims that you threatened to castrate him with a rusty kunai if he wasn't in position in the next 5 seconds before throwing said kunai between his legs with great force. Anko teeth were audibly grinding against one another as she forced herself to remain silent. Asking a question was one thing, but shouting at the Hokage, the Jounin commander, and her old Chunin commander was quite another. It didn't help her case that even with those descriptions she couldn't actually narrow it down to a single event. The members of the panel watched her reaction for a long moment before sharing a quick glance. Hiroshi then tossed the scrolls back onto the table. We have numerous other examples. They were of course noted and investigated at the time, and our review has caused them to be re-evaluated once again. Would you like to know what we found? Mitarashi-san. Anko nodded her head silently, already resigning herself to the coming rejection. In every instance the person filing the complaint was a Chunin, and upon further review we have found not a single one of them has been promoted to Tokubetsu Jounin, much less Jounin. Further, we have found that many of them have filed other complaints against their various team leaders regarding similar issues. She blinked in surprise, having honestly not expected that the Hokage spoke up next, a small smile on his face. It is our judgment, given the success of your missions and the pattern established by these Chunin, that you acted well within the bounds of your authority to maintain discipline during a mission. We also noted that at no point have you caused injuries or lasting physical harm to anyone under your command. Anko relaxed slightly just in time for the Hokage to pin her to the floor with a glare and a small bit of focused killing intent. I expect that to continue to be the case. Mitarashi-san, you have not crossed the line at any point, but some of your actions have come close. In the future I expect you to find less physical means of maintaining discipline when leading missions. She nodded jerkily, small beads of sweat trickling down her face. She didn't trust herself to speak at the moment, and so made no verbal reply. The Hokage held his glare for a moment before he relented, his face settling into a neutral expression. Once again, the next subject regards your recent A-rank mission to organize and lead the second phase of the Chunin exams. As you are aware, this mission was entrusted to you to allow you to prove that you had the skill and experience necessary to organize and lead a medium-scale non-combat operation. At a nod from the Hokage, Shikaku took over the discussion again. Your idea for using the team numbers proved effective and properly emphasized the need for information gathering and memorization. We feel that the test would have been more effective had the teams been forcibly spread out when placed in the forest of death, since analysis shows that despite the supposedly random nature of the assignments, the teams were mostly grouped in 2 sections of the forest. That said, overall the test was a success. We attribute the fact that 6 teams managed to reach the tower to the unusually high quality of the entrance this year rather than a flaw in the design, while the disappearance of most of the teams during the second phase has yet to be adequately explained. No fault lies with you. For that the mission parameters stated that the genin teams were not to be tracked while they were within the confines of the forest. Indiana hindsight, this was a mistake, but at the time the possibility of causing an incident with the other hidden villages due to accusations of tampering with the exams was deemed too high. Further, other than one disciplinary incident which is still being reviewed by the Chunin commanders, there have been no complaints or issues that arose before, during, or after the second phase that required outside intervention. Shikaku said, nodding to the Hokage to indicate that he was finished. The three ninja on the panel consulted briefly before turning to look at Anko, the Hokage once again speaking. There are no other subjects which we feel need to be addressed. Do you have anything to add that you feel we have overlooked or failed to consider? Mitarashi-san. Anko shook her head stiffly. No, Hokage-sama. Very well. Another brief consultation, and all three were staring at her with stern expressions. It is the judgment of this panel that you, Anko Mitarashi, shall be promoted immediately to Jounin with all duties, responsibilities, and authority that such rank entails. The Hokage said, a smile growing on his face. Anko just stared at him blankly for a long moment before her face split into a grin. She barely managed to continue the victorious shout that threatened to erupt from her throat, instead saying, thank you, Hokage-sama. I won't let you down. I'm sure that you won't. Mitarashi-san, in fact, as you are now a full Jounin, you are eligible for a mission that seems perfectly suited for you. Anko blinked before settling back into a professional demeanor and nodding solemnly. I await your orders, Hokage-sama. Before that, we need to bring you up to speed on a developing situation regarding the third phase of the exams. Let us retire to my office. Time skip. Hokage's office. Anko stared at the Hokage in disbelief. She wanted to laugh or crack a joke, but she couldn't quite managed to do so. Someone is willing to pay 25 million ryo for my capture, she asked, her voice sounding slightly strangled. The Hokage nodded solemnly. To our knowledge, you have no outstanding bounties in other countries, and while you have completed a few high-profile assassination missions, there is no indication that anyone has traced those back to you. Do you know why, or who? We do not. Do you have any idea who could be trying to capture you, or why? Anko reflexively rubbed at the junction between her shoulder and neck directly over the curse mark. Her gesture was not missed by the Hokage. The bastard might, but paying someone else to do his work isn't really his style. He always insisted that if you wanted something done right, you had to do it yourself. The Hokage nodded in agreement. He had taught Orochimaru for years, after all, and was quite familiar with his personality. Besides, Anko said bitterly, he tossed me aside like trash years ago. A small part of her rage and loathing for Orochimaru leaked into her voice and her face, and she stared into the distance as she recalled the teacher she would have done anything for and the monster he had turned into is lost. The Hokage said firmly, smiling gently at Anko. His insanity did not end with his experiments in Konoha. Is the better for it? Anko nodded, quickly clearing her throat. Roughly what was the mission you wanted me for, Hokage-sama? She asked, changing the subject to less emotional territory. I want you to form a rapid response combat team that will be active from 2 days prior to the third phase. Through its completion, your mission will be to locate and neutralize any hostile forces that infiltrate Konoha, more specifically sectors 1 through 4. Team members, you are free to request any ninja in our standing forces, though I will need to review them to make sure they are not already assigned elsewhere. Obtaining prior agreement from the ninja in question would help significantly. Team size up to 3 squads of 4 members each, yourself included. Capture or kill if feasible. Capture without raising an alarm if general fighting should break out. Kill as quickly and efficiently as possible. What of casualties? On our side, you will be provided with signal tags. Should any civilians or ninja be injured, mark them with a tag and move on. Other teams will be assigned to taking care of casualties. You or your team may provide a small amount of medical aid at your discretion if you believe it to be necessary, but you are to focus on limiting the damage as much as possible by removing the hostile elements. Understood, Hokage-sama, Anko said before falling silent as she contemplated her assignment. Any other questions? The Hokage asked. Not at this time, Hokage-sama. Very well, submit your team member requests to the Jounin commander by noon tomorrow. You should find him in mission room for dismissed. Time skip. Suna Kazakage's office. Kazakage-sama, we have received confirmation that one of our teams successfully completed the second phase. Which team? Baki's team. Kazakage-sama, what of the other teams that passed? For Konoha teams and 1 team from the new village of Odo passed the second phase, but only 2 of the Konoha teams are advancing to the third phase. In addition, it appears that the death toll during the phase was exceptionally high. Of the 26 teams that entered the forest, only 10 left alive. The others are presumed dead, including 2 of our teams. I see. It seems the weapon was unable to control himself properly. The Kazekage said that Jounin, delivering the news, opened his mouth to correct the Kazekage, then immediately snapped it shut again. The information he had suggested that Gaara was not responsible since his team finished first, but then he couldn't say for certain that Gaara wasn't, and he had no desire to contradict the Kazekage with nothing but guesses and assumptions on his side. The Kazekage's temper was fickle at the best of times, and he had no desire to have it turned on him. He settled for saying nothing. Very well, the Kazekage said after a few moments of contemplation. Unless you have anything further to report, you are dismissed. Yes, Kazekage-sama. The Kazekage stared out the window thoughtfully. He was unsurprised to hear that the weapon had killed Suna Genin. He had half expected for every Genin in the second phase to have perished. It seemed the weapon's teammates were more effective at controlling him than he had thought. He would have to correct that mistake. His secretary's voice interrupted his musings. Kazekage-sama, your next appointment is here. Send them. And he replied, returning to his desk. An old man slowly shuffled into the room, his back bent with the weight of his years. He wore traditional Suna attire of dull browns and faded blacks, the clothing hanging loosely on his frame but protecting his skin from the sun. He only retained a few wisps of gray hair on his head, and one of his eyes had turned milky white, revealing its blindness. The Kazekage's eyes narrowed as he wondered who this old man was. The Kazekage straightened in his seat, motioning to the guards around the room. I require complete privacy for this meeting, he said firmly, his eyes slightly glazed. Understood, Kazekage-sama, a voice replied from the shadows. The door clicked softly shut. A moment later, the seals reactivating to prevent anyone from spying on the Kazekage. The old man walked forward with sudden grace, his back straightening as he walked around the Kazekage's desk and began methodically reviewing the documents located on top of the desk and within its many hidden compartments. The Kazekage did not react, his eyes staring directly ahead. Unseeing report, the old man said, his voice sounding far too strong to have issued from his seemingly feeble body. I have carried out your orders as requested. The Jinchuriki was sent to Konoha and has advanced to the third phase. Reports indicate that he also killed many of the other teams. As expected, their attention should be focused on him, and he will likely be targeted for retribution during the third phase. Odds are high that one or both of his teammates will perish, and Orochimaru. 2 squads of ANBU are prepared to intercept his agents as they flee Konoha. In addition, all available infiltration specialists have been assigned to slip into Konoha during the third phase and cause as much damage as possible once Orochimaru's plan begins. Unless given specific instructions, they will target the civilian sectors of the village and focus on structural damage and injuring as many civilians as possible. They should be able to tie up a substantial portion of Konoha's ninja and rescuing the injured civilians, weakening their protections. Elsewhere, the old man read over one of the documents he had found carefully before placing it back in the drawer and moving on. What of the Wind Lord? The Wind Lord has declined a ninja escort of any kind, choosing to rely on his samurai. He has also threatened to cut our funding even further if we do not represent his country well during the exams. Did he promise to raise it if you did know? The old man snorted softly. Of course he didn't. What is the current sentiment regarding the Wind Lord among your forces? They resent his interference and condescension, though it has not reached the point they would be willing to act against him directly. Do you have enough ninja willing to interfere with his operations to cause him problems? Possibly. I would need to recall some of them from the field, however. Do so. Begin by raising the crime rates in the capital and killing off minor functionaries in his court. From there you may escalate as you see fit, as long as nothing connects your actions to Suna. In the meantime, leak the Wind Lord's ultimatum to the general forces and continue to stir resentment against him. I want all of Suna's ninja turned against the Wind Lord within the year. Understood. Do you have any new materials for me? Yes, one Jounin died during a recent mission. It happened close enough to Suna that his team brought his body back rather than destroying it in the field. As per your orders, I replaced his body with a fake before it was cremated. The body is currently sealed in a scroll labeled February Economic Report Part 3 in the second hidden compartment. Excellent, the old man said, smiling slightly. He pulled out the named scroll a few moments later, tucking it away within his clothing. Any other news of interest? No. Very well, other than what we talked about here, your orders remain the same. Understood. Sasori-sama had quickly dealt with the old man's petty concerns and sent him on his way. The unimportant civilian already fading from his memory, he turned his attention to his upcoming trip to Konoha. For the Chunin exams he had many things to prepare. Time skip. Konoha Hospital. Shizen rubbed her temples, feeling the beginnings of a headache coming on. The Hokage had ordered her to review all the emergency protocols for the Mednin prior to the third phase to make sure they were up to date and that all of her staff understood their roles and how they should respond to any of a dozen different situations. It was a daunting task, made even worse by the small amount of time she had available. A polite knock sounded at her door before it opened to reveal one of her most effective subordinates, Akabuto-kun. I'm glad You're here, she said, smiling. Of course, Shizen-sama, he said, adjusting his glasses slightly. How can I help you? She motioned him to join her at her desk. I've got some rank med-nin restricted documents I need you to sort through. Take these 3 stacks, she said, motioning to the neat piles sitting on one side of her desk, and create enough pamphlets to distribute to every jounin med-nin in Konoha. Once you've done that, come back, and I'll have some more stacks for you to work through. Kabuto smiled politely and picked up the papers. Of course, Shizen-sama. Shizen smiled at him apologetically. I'll need all of those done by tomorrow. Kabuto-kun, he frowned slightly before nodding resolutely. I'll make sure it gets done, Shizen-sama. Once the Chunin exams are over and things settle down a bit, I'll see about getting you some bonus pay, she said. I appreciate the thought, Shizen-sama, but I am happy to help in any way I can. Shizen shook her head. You are one of my best med-nin, and Kami knows they don't pay any of us enough for the crap we have to go through. Kabuto smirked slightly. I would not dream of disagreeing with you, Shizen-sama. Shizen bit off a quick laugh before motioning him out of the room. Time to get to work, Kabuto-kun. I've got many more of these to get through. Of course, Shizen-sama, Kabuto said, bowing and leaving the room, closing the door firmly behind him. As he did so, he paused in the hallway, adjusting his glasses slightly as he eyed the top page of the papers he had been given. Emergency Response Plan IN 471 for deployment and triage procedures for compromised internal security and hostile combatant presence. It read. Yes, Kabuto said quietly to himself, always happy to help. Time skip placed the paper on the top of the stack and just spent a moment enjoying the sight of his clean desk. He was fully caught up on his paperwork for the first time this month, and a little celebration was due. Then he remembered he still had to carry everything over to the Hokage's tower so it could be read through and filed away. With a sigh, he started bundling everything up before he was interrupted by a knock at the door. Come, and he called out. The door opened to reveal one of the other instructors, Mizuki. Mizuki had joined the academy as a Chunin 3 years ago after the rest of his team was killed on a mission. He had retired from field work after that, preferring to stick to the village. Mizuki wasn't the best teacher in the academy, but he was a solid taijutsu instructor and did his share of the work. Anything you need, Mizuki? Iruka asked curiously. Nah, I was about to head over to the tower to turn in my reports and thought I would see if anyone else still had to turn in theirs, he said, hefting the stack of papers he was carrying for emphasis. I was about to head that way myself, actually, Iruka replied, motioning to his own stack of papers. Want me to carry those for you? No sense in both of us making the trip, Mizuki offered. Iruka glanced at the clock on the wall, noting that he was already an hour past his normal departure time. You sure? He asked hesitantly. It's fine, Mizuki insisted, walking over to pick up Iruka's papers as well. I'm going to grab some dinner in the area anyway. Iruka nodded, smiling. Thanks, I owe you one. Mizuki just shrugged. You helped me out a lot when I first started. This is the least I can do. Iruka clapped him on the shoulder as he headed out the door. Thanks again, and I'll see you next week. Sure thing, Mizuki called back. 30 minutes later, Mizuki entered the records department of the Hokage's tower, nodding politely to the various clerks and guards as he passed. After 3 years at the academy, he was a familiar sight to the people who worked here, and he was on a first-name basis with most of them, dropping off this week's paperwork. Keiko-chan, he said, smiling at one of the clerks. Keiko looked up and returned his smile. Another large pile, I see. Are the other teachers still making you carry all their paperwork for them? She asked, frowning cutely. It's no problem, Mizuki replied. Besides, it gives me an excuse to come see you. Keiko smirked at him, still not giving up. Huh? Not until I at least get one date out of you. Keep it up and you just might sign here. Mizuki grinned and bent down, signing his name with a flourish. He watched out of the corner of his eye as an ANBU deactivated the seals on the far side of the room, revealing the doorway that led to the more restricted section of the records department that housed sensitive documents and other important scrolls such as Konoha's legendary Forbidden Scroll. His grin grew slightly. 3 years of drudgery and boredom would all be paying off very soon. Orochimaru-sama had given him a great deal of information on how the records department worked, but he hadn't found a way to get in and out that had even a 50-50 chance of success, much less the much higher rates that he preferred. Fortunately, with the upcoming third phase, and Orochimaru-sama's assurances that security would be focused on other areas, he could take a more direct approach. He may not be able to get through the seals the proper way, but he'd had more than enough time and resources to figure out a way he could brute force his way through them. He could get in and out within 15 minutes, and then he would be fleeing Konoha with his prize. Thanks, Keiko-chan, he said, straightening up. Let me know if you change your mind. I'll be sure to do that, Mizuki-kun. Keiko replied with a wave and another smile. He made his way out of the records department confirming the positioning of the other guards. He knew himself well enough to know that he couldn't take an ANBU one-on-one unless he got very lucky. He'd requested that Orochimaru-sama provide him with a partner for this task and had been assured that one would meet him on the second day of the third phase in order to assist him with any resistance. One more week and then he could begin to enjoy the fruits of his labors. Time skip training ground. 19 guys sprinted into the clearing, panting heavily as they slowed to a jog and began circling the clearing to cool down. They had just finished the last part of their initial exercise routine, which culminated in sprinting around the perimeter of the training ground at full speed for 10 laps. Well done, my youthful pupils, Guy said from beside them. He had kept pace with his students, but had barely broken a sweat. Let us now discuss strategies for your upcoming youthful battles, he exclaimed, leading them to the center of the clearing. Lee, Niji and Tenten jogged over to join their teacher at a slow pace as they continued their cool-down routines. Have you given further thought to your desired matchups? We have, Guy-sensei, Niji replied, his words coming out slowly as he sucked in lungfuls of air. Barring unusual circumstances with the terrain, we believe it would be best if Lee faces Naruto while I face Hinata-sama and Tenten faces Ino. And why is that? Guy prompted. Tenten answered, next, Lee is the only one better at taijutsu than Naruto, and he's also faster. Naruto can neutralize the Juken through sheer chakra expenditure, not to mention he learned how to flare his chakra and blind Byakugan users temporarily. So Niji is out. I'm out since he can block my ranged attacks all day and he's just too fast for me up close. I'm still working on a ranged attack with more piercing power, but it won't be ready in time for the third phase with his secret weapon. Lee should be able to overwhelm Naruto, hopefully. Guy nodded sagely. Well reasoned. I do not wish for Lee to use that technique rashly, but against the most youthful Naruto-kun he does indeed have the best chance. What about the other two? I am most familiar with Hinata-sama's fighting style as we have trained together for many years. While I have not won every bout in the past, the odds of victory are still in my favor. Should we be pressed? I too have a secret technique to employ. Guy beamed at Niji. Mastering the Kaiten at such a young age was easily Niji's greatest achievement to date, and one that he was proud to have been a part of. Still, he wasn't about to let their explanation go with just that. What about Tenten's chances against Hinata, or your chances against Ino? He prompted. Guy-sensei, Lee called out, taking over the explanation. Tenten has a better chance against Ino due to her ranged attacks. Ino has unknown speed and range with the Yamanaka techniques, and the only known method for resisting those techniques is to avoid them entirely. Niji, like myself, is focused on close combat and is thus vulnerable to such attacks. Ino's father is also noted as the most successful Yamanaka in employing their clan techniques in combat, and he will have certainly instructed Ino on how to do so as well. Niji grimaced but nodded in agreement. Tenten will be able to keep Ino at range and thus maximize her chances of avoiding any Yamanaka techniques. As for Hinata-sama, Tenten is familiar with the Juken thanks to her spars with me, but she is used to facing my version of the style, which focuses on power and penetration. Hinata-sama's style is focused on speed and flexibility, and Tenten's instinctive reactions based on fighting my style would leave her exposed to Hinata-sama's attacks. I, on the other hand, have faced Hinata-sama many times and am well acquainted with her method of fighting and how to counter it. Yash, Tenten, how do you plan to combat the youthful Ino? Tenten grimaced. I had originally hoped to overwhelm her with kunai like I did Sakura, but after seeing her lightning jutsu, that's out. The others nodded solemnly in agreement. Tenten's propensity to fling large quantities of kunai and other metal weapons would most definitely work against her in that situation. I have a few wooden weapons in my arsenal, a staff and a couple of other blunt weapons. I'll be adding some wooden throwing weapons and low-powered explosive tags in preparation for the battle, and for the battle itself, keep the fight at long range and don't give her time to get any jutsu off. Once I create an opening, I'll charge in and take her out. She's definitely the weakest fighter of the three, so I should be able to control the flow of battle and defeat her quickly. From there I'll have to see who needs support. Guy frowned slightly. Do not become overconfident, my pupils. It has been many months since you participated in the group training sessions, and my eternal rival Kakashi is highly experienced. I would expect all of his students to have learned new abilities under his tutelage, just as you have learned under mine. Lee cried out suddenly. What is the first rule of planning? Yash, the first rule of planning is that no plan survives contact with the enemy. Guy-sensei, Lee cried out enthusiastically. Well said, Niji. What is the first rule of combat? The enemy always has another weapon, Niji replied, smirking slightly. Well said, Tenten. What is the second rule of combat? The only thing better than avoiding an enemy's attack is turning that attack against them. Well said, keep these rules in mind and you will do well. Now let us resume our training. Time skip outside of Konoha. Orochimaru's eyes snapped open as one of his subordinates entered the room. The Jounin, just one of many missing nin who had flocked to his banner in recent years, and one who was neither interesting nor powerful enough to warrant the effort it would take to remember his name, immediately knelt, his head bowed, and his gaze fixed on the floor. Report. Orochimaru snapped impatiently. Yes, Orochimaru-sama, the chakra squads have completed their training and are on schedule as ordered. They are now preserving their chakra as much as possible to prepare for the attack. Good. One of our agents within Konoha, Mizuki, has signaled that his preparations are complete with the attack. He estimates a 90% chance of success. Other agents report isolated incidences of suspicious activity among Konoha's ranks, but nothing that indicates they are aware of the attack. Mostly an extra training drill here or there, or unexpected shifts in security rotations. Many word on the Eastern Dragons. Yes, Orochimaru-sama, they have filled all of our requested contracts but have also offered a number of their own. A full list of known contracts is being compiled, but so far none of them seem to conflict with your own requests. I see, Orochimaru said, drawing out the word with a sibilant hiss. Unlike his idiotic subordinate, Orochimaru could actually read between the lines of the report. The Eastern Dragons had given away too much with their extra contracts, and Konoha knew something was going to happen. The question was just how much. Did they know anything else? No, Orochimaru-sama. Then you may go, Orochimaru said, dismissing the man. Once the Jounin had left the room, he closed his eyes once again and focused on the thread of chakra that stretched from his body off into the distance several miles away, and within the walls of Konoha. His eyes snapped open once again, and he sat up, stretching and twisting his body back and forth as he adjusted to the sudden change. His eyes turned to the other occupants of the room, who were eyeing him with a mixture of disgust, fear and fascination. Just the way he liked it. I trust one haven't kept you waiting too long, he said softly, a small smirk on his face. Kadamaru and Sakan shook their heads quickly. Of course not, Orochimaru-sama, they replied. Orochimaru checked the privacy seals plastered around the room to make sure they were still operating correctly before he turned to his subordinates. Once again the situation remains unchanged. He began focusing intently on the two as he began pacing about the room. We will lose in the first round after putting on a decent show, but remain within Konoha to witness the second round of the third phase as spectators. Once the matches have started and everyone is focused on the battle, we will then leave the stadium to attend to our respective tasks. Kadamaru, you will assist Mizuki in retrieving the Forbidden Scroll along with any other documents you can acquire. Once you accomplish that, use the explosive tags I have supplied to destroy anything that remains. I don't expect you will do any real damage, but it will be one more thing to divide Konoha's attention. Sakan, you two will accompany me until I begin the attack as my guard, then infiltrate the hospital and acquire any promising specimens you can find. I expect there will be plenty to choose from once I begin my work. You are to withdraw after 30 minutes and leave Konoha with whatever you have managed to acquire in that time. If you encounter any of our contractors, do not interfere with them. Meanwhile, I will be arranging our main entertainment for the day with my own skill and the ninja located outside of Konoha providing the chakra. I should be able to keep Konoha on its toes for at least an hour. Then there's our little surprises we've been distributing around town. Kukuku. Orochimaru trailed off, chuckling to himself. It had taken him years to pull this plan together, and it had taken his fortuitous acquisition of that strange little black rod from AIM to provide the final piece. He spent months determining that the rod functioned as an incredibly powerful chakra receiver, and months more determining the best way to use it. Eventually he had latched onto the idea of combining his theory behind the body transfer jutsu with the capabilities of that rod. From there it had been a matter of acquiring or producing more, but with a template to work from that had been a minor challenge to someone of his genius, and now he was living the results, controlling a dead body from miles away with naught but chakra and pure skill. His abilities were severely limited in some ways. He had to make adjustments for the differences between this body and his own, and his awareness and reflexes suffered greatly the more time he spent practicing. However, the better his control became in time, he would be able to operate at something approaching the skill he possessed within his own body. Until then, he would have to be satisfied with what he could get beyond the obvious benefits in terms of safety and infiltration. However, were the unexpected boons to his original plan for attacking Konoha. Edo Tensei was an absurdly powerful technique when used correctly, capable of reviving the most powerful individuals of all time and binding them to the summoners. Will the resurrected retain the knowledge and skills they had in life and gained a nearly perfect form of invulnerability by means of regeneration. As long as the summoner continued to feed chakra into the technique, the resurrected would continue to reform around the control tag that served as the anchor for the technique. Sadly, the chakra required to actually use the resurrected in battle was even more absurd. The resurrected may retain their skills, but they did not retain their chakra. Any technique used by the resurrected consumes the summoner's chakra, and often far more than if the summoner had used the technique themselves. Orochimaru's own experiments had shown that this could be alleviated somewhat by using skills the resurrected was highly proficient with in life. Their own knowledge of how to reduce chakra expenditure carried over into their resurrected form as well. Even with that knowledge, however, the jutsu was still almost prohibitively exhausting. His initial experiments had drained nearly half of his reserves within 30 minutes, and that was without using his more powerful techniques. Such a cost was unacceptable, and he had nearly discarded the idea altogether. Then he had found the black chakra rods, and everything changed. Not only had he personally learned how to transfer chakra to an external source with only moderate loss of chakra efficiency, he had also crafted his control tags for the resurrected out of the material that made up the chakra rod. This not only boosted his control over the resurrected even further, but raised the efficiency of the chakra transfer to nearly perfect levels. His original plan to attack Konoha had called for massive numbers of ninja to serve as distractions, so much so that it would in truth be more an army than a squad, and his plan an outright invasion rather than a mission. His new plan called for less than 100 ninja, the majority of whom would never set foot in Konoha at all. They would be scattered randomly outside of Konoha, pouring their chakra into metal rods that coincided with the tags that anchored the Edo Tensei. The few ninja actually entering Konoha would pursue one of two goals. One group was responsible for assembling and activating the explosive tags planted around Konoha. Unlike conventional tags, these were carved into wooden blocks that could be connected and primed at a later date to any but a highly skilled and observant seal crafter. The lines that made up the seals would appear to be merely decorative. The seals were far from perfect, of course, and were generally inferior in both power and stability to paper tags of similar size, but the ones assembling them didn't need to know that more than a few of the wooden exploding seals would either fail to activate entirely or else explode early. Taking out the ninja, putting it together along with the surrounding area enough would do their job to provide yet another distraction for Konoha. However, the other group was assigned to retrieve information or useful objects during the attack. Clan Scrolls mission records. Anything and everything he thought might serve to strengthen him or weaken Konoha would be targeted. He would be targeting sensitive locations during his own attack in order to cause damage and provide an opportunity for his subordinates to enter the area under the guise of would-be rescuers or medics. He chuckled to himself. All of that planning was long-term and only partly why he was doing this. More than anything, he wanted revenge on the village that had rejected him after everything he had done for it, and he wanted to show them what their prodigal son had managed to accomplish. They had turned up their collective nose at his research and his unquestionably effective methods at him. Now he would show Konoha just what his efforts had wrought. One man would be all it took to bring Konoha to its knees. His chuckles devolved into maniacal laughter as he recalled the three resurrected bodies waiting to be unleashed upon Konoha. It was a shame Tsunade had left. He was sure she would have enjoyed the reunion almost as much as he would time-skip Konoha Hospital. Thanks for helping me out, Shizune-chan, Naruto said, smiling slightly. I'm always happy to help you, Naruto-kun. You know that. Besides, I'm not about to leave someone to suffer if I can help them. Now, what have you figured out so far? Well, I identified some scarring in the lower regions of his lungs, but couldn't determine any cause for it. He has also complained that he occasionally has trouble catching his breath for no apparent reason, and that he had begun to feel a little fatigued. I see, Shizen said, nodding thoughtfully. Anything else? Not that I could see. All right, I suppose it's time I take a look for myself. With that, she pushed open the door to the examination room and walked in, smiling. Good afternoon, Mikawa-san. How are you feeling today? Fairly well, all things considered, the young brown-haired man said in a pleasant baritone. That's good to hear. I'm Shizen, the chief medical ninja here at the hospital. Naruto-kun has filled me in on everything he found so far, but I'll be performing my own examination to see if I can find anything he missed. Thank you, Shizen-sama. I really appreciate someone as important as yourself taking the time to help me. It's no trouble at all, she replied, her hand already glowing green. The room fell silent as she focused on her jutsu, her hand slowly traveling back and forth across her patient's chest as she frowned thoughtfully. After a few minutes, she lowered her hand and stepped back, looking pensive. Well, I've got Some good news and some bad news, she said. Naruto and the young man both stiffened slightly. The bad news, Shizen said, smiling apologetically, is that I have no idea how to cure this. What's the good news? The young man asked slowly. The good news is that I have seen this before when I was studying under my teacher, and she determined that as long as the damage was corrected periodically, anyone suffering from this would not really feel any ill effects. I see, the young man said. How often would I need to be treated? My teacher determined that every 6 months would likely be optimal given your otherwise excellent health. I would say you could go up to a year between treatments if you had to. The young man nodded thoughtfully. Would I need to come to Konoha every time, or would another medical ninja be able to perform the necessary treatments? Oh, any decent med nin could do this. I can give you a quick rundown of what they would need to do. If you end up seeking treatment elsewhere, that would be greatly appreciated. I am only in Konoha for a short time and do not expect to be able to travel easily. I'll do that then. In the meantime, I'll go ahead and correct the damage. Now Naruto-kun, make sure you pay attention. What you need to do is time skip. So what's your plan now? Kushu asked as he left the hospital along with Itachi. The streets were already beginning to swell with travelers and merchants arriving for the third phase of the exams, so they kept their conversation lighthearted and innocuous. Mindful of the many people who could overhear what they were saying, I will be staying to attend the third phase of the exams. Itachi replied quietly. I've always wanted to see ninja fight, and I hear that this year will be particularly interesting, he added. And what are you going to do if things are a little more exciting than you expect? As I am now, the excitement would be too much for me, and since I have delivered my messages and visited the hospital, I consider my official business concluded. From here on out I will be enjoying my stay in Konoha as a tourist, nothing more. Kushu frowned slightly but nodded. Fair enough, Kushu conceded, though I hope that won't always be the case. Itachi shrugged. That remains to be seen. I find my current situation to be pleasant. I do not wish it to be disrupted without good reason. You never did tell me exactly what you've been up to lately. I certainly appreciate all the letters you've sent me, but you haven't exactly talked about yourself much. Kushu prompted. Itachi just smirked and kept walking. Time skip. Council chambers. Esteemed counselors, thank you for attending this meeting on such short notice. I realize all of you are busy with preparations for the third phase, and so I will keep this short and to the point, Sarutobi said, smiling at the assembled civilians and ninja in the room. After the fiasco with the Uchiha, the council had settled down into something much closer to its original purpose. The Ogawa and Kurama clans had gained their seats and brought valuable perspectives and resources to the board, and the Uchiha seat had reverted into a temporary position currently filled by Hiro Yamashita, one of Konoha's Chunin commanders. The other major change had been the addition of the Konoha chief of police to the council as a distinct seat. The Hokage appointed the chief of police at his sole discretion, and the position was currently ably filled by Tsum Inuzuka. Tsum and her clan had proven very effective at tracking down criminals, and no one was stupid enough to question their loyalty to the village. As you know, it has been nearly 13 years since I once again took up the mantle of Hokage, and nearly 20 since I first retired. I can feel my age growing on me, and I fear that I will not live much longer. Sarutobi smiled softly at the denials that rang out in the room. I appreciate your concern, and rest assured I have no intention of dying just yet. However, as Hokage, I must acknowledge and prepare for such an event. To that end, I have decided to name my successor to the title of Hokage. The room fell into a stunned silence. Each understood that the Hokage would not live forever, but for most of the people in the room, he had been Hokage longer than they had been alive. It was difficult to imagine someone else as their leader, especially since there was no obvious successor with the skill and charisma that Minato had possessed. As you might imagine, this is one decision that I have given a great deal of thought to over the years. To serve as Hokage is simultaneously a joyous duty and a terrible burden, and anyone who takes up the mantle must be prepared to sacrifice both themselves and others to secure the safety of the village as a whole. They must also have the respect and trust of the village in order to succeed. The Hokage has a great deal of power, but it is a power born of loyalty, not forced. Thus, after a great deal of careful thought and consideration, I have chosen Shikaku Nara as my successor. The council remained silent for a few seconds as they contemplated that choice, then slowly smiles and nods began to spread. Many of them already looked to the Nara for guidance in various matters, and he was well known as one of the Hokage's greatest advisors. His work as Jounin commander had also proven that he had what it took to get things done under his own volition. Unsurprisingly, it was Inoichi and Chuza who began clapping first, both smiling widely as they congratulated their friend and teammate. Soon the whole room was standing on their feet as they acknowledged their future Hokage. Troublesome Shikaku muttered, though he was smiling slightly at the praise he had already known for some time, and the ANBU commander and certain others had been informed, but this was the first time the council had heard anything about the decision. After a minute the room quietened down, and the Hokage resumed speaking. I will be retiring once again shortly. after the Chunin exams have concluded and Shikaku's appointment will be announced at that time. I have already agreed to serve in an advisory capacity moving forward to help smooth the transition. Honestly, after serving this village for so long, it would be strange to stop doing so entirely. The council chuckled quietly and nodded, feeling a little relieved to know that Sarutobi would still be watching over the village. They liked and respected Shikaku, but he wasn't Sarutobi. The third Hokage was truly one of a kind. I believe that Shikaku had a few things he wanted to say as well, the Hokage said, nodding to the Nara. Shikaku stood up, looking around the room slowly as he spoke. I appreciate the level of trust and acceptance you have shown me, and I vow to do everything in my power to serve this village to the best of my ability. As I will be taking on the mantle of Hokage, we will obviously need another Jounin commander. After consulting with the Hokage and the ANBU commander, we have decided that Shibi Aburame will be stepping into that role. More nods around the room. Shibi was also well respected and absolutely meticulous and seemed well suited for the position. Shikaku exchanged a quick glance with the Hokage. Shibi had been their second choice, although they both knew he could do the job. Their first choice had been Kakashi Hatake, as they had hoped to use his time as Jounin commander to give him more experience dealing with the political and administrative side of Konoha, with the aim of preparing him to eventually take on the mantle of Hokage himself. Kakashi had refused. The one-eyed Jounin had insisted that he would continue teaching his team until all of them had reached Jounin, and only then would he consider taking up the job of Jounin commander. The Hokage could have pressed the point or even ordered him to do it, but the last thing Konoha needed was a Jounin commander who didn't like his job, that had disaster written all over it. The Hokage had been disappointed, but it had also reaffirmed his decision to appoint Shikaku as his successor. Kakashi simply wasn't ready for the type of responsibility and sacrifice the position required. Shikaku sat down once again and the Hokage took over the meeting. I remind you that none of this has been announced to the public, nor will it be until after the third phase has concluded and our many guests have departed. We don't want rumors flying around with everything else that is going on. Sarutobi smirked internally. He figured most of Konoha would know by the end of tomorrow. The ninja were astute enough to note that he never actually said not to tell anyone, and the civilians would inevitably tell someone who would tell someone else, and so on. Any hostile forces within Konoha would pick up on these rumors and take them as a sign of weakness, possibly leading to overconfidence and mistakes. And with that, this meeting is concluded, the Hokage said. With that bit of business out of the way, he could turn his attention back to the preparations for the so-called disruption during the third phase. Naruto's no Kushus, he reminded himself, warning that someone was trying to assassinate Gaara and release the bijou he contained, had shifted their focus away from Suna onto a more widespread threat. There was no way Suna would be willing to simply sacrifice their Jinchuriki like that. Unfortunately, Gaara's identity was possibly the worst kept secret in the elemental nations, and Konoha had plenty of enemies who would be willing to strike at them in such an indirect manner, so they were no closer to determining who exactly had ordered the boy's assassination. Kushu had also been very tight-lipped about the identity of his mysterious informant, and Sarutobi wasn't yet willing to reveal exactly how and why Jiraiya had gotten his information about the realms, which was Kushu's price. In fact, Sarutobi thought with a sigh he'd actually made very little headway in confirming anything Kushu had told him. Both the toads and monkeys continued their litany of "I can't answer that question," and the little time he'd had to search his own records hadn't revealed anything useful. Oddly enough, the one thing he had been able to confirm was that Kami and the Death God were one and the same. That piece of information was tangential at best to the things he really needed to know, but it was confirmation that Kushu hadn't been making everything up on the spot. Still, he had 2 more days before his next meeting with the bijou, and at the moment he had no idea what he was going to do. He didn't trust the bijou nearly enough to simply accept his words on faith, but he also had no leverage to use against him, not to mention that he wasn't at all certain how the bijou would react. Even if he did have leverage, Kushu obviously didn't want to be banished, but to an immortal being 100 years might as well be nothing should Kushu deliver on his threat, and that much at least he believed Konoha would suffer far more than the bijou would. That left the carrot approach, which in some ways could be just as bad judging by Kushu's actions as Naruto. He wanted power and knowledge and cared little for anything else. Unfortunately, everything he learned would make him more of a threat if he was not so much loyal but willing to work with them. Then Konoha would benefit. If he was an enemy, Konoha would lose out in the end. For the moment, working with Kushu seemed the best course of action. He would keep his eye open for any sign of weakness or anything he could take advantage of. However, it was not in his nature to work from a position of weakness, and Konoha was not well served by having to bow to the whims of a bijou.